Good morning. How are you today?
Good morning. Good morning.
For nearly 30 years, Mr. Depp built a reputation as one of the most talented actors in Hollywood, a respected artist whose name was associated with success at the box office. Today, his name is associated with a lie, a false statement uttered by his former wife, the defendant Amber Heard, that falsely cast Mr. Depp, falsely and unfairly cast Mr. Depp as a villain, a man who would violently abuse a woman. This is a defamation case. It's a case about how devastating words can be when they are false and uttered publicly. Under the law, a person who makes a false statement about someone else can be held responsible for the harm that results from that falsehood. That's because words matter. They paint a picture in our mind based on what we have experienced and what we know, or what we think we know. And because of that, words can evoke strong emotions in the listener and cause irreparable harm to a person's reputation. And when, like Mr. Depp, your career depends upon your image and your reputation, or whether movie producers want their films associated with you, that harm can be particularly devastating. This is a case about the impact of Amber Heard's words on Johnny Depp. Specifically, the words that she used in an op-ed published in the Washington Post in December 2018, which is shown on the screens. And the op-ed was published, and this is no accident, the evidence will show, on the eve of her first major acting role in the movie Aquaman. The evidence will show that's no coincidence. The evidence will show the words that Ms. Heard used, which are the subject of Mr. Depp's defamation suit against her. And there are three statements that we respectfully ask each of you to focus on. Statement number one, quote, "I spoke up against sexual violence and faced our culture's wrath." Statement number two, 2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse. And I want to repeat that because you're going to hear that throughout the case, because the timing here is critical. 2 years ago, I became a public figure representing domestic abuse. Statement number three, quote, "I had the rare vantage point of seeing in real time how institutions protect men accused of abuse," unquote. Ms. Heard did not use Mr. Depp's name in the op-ed. She didn't have to. She didn't have to because the evidence will show that everyone in Hollywood, where Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard both have their careers, and many others outside Hollywood, knew exactly what she was talking about when she used the word 2 years ago. I became a public figure representing domestic abuse. That's because, as the evidence will show, and you will hear, 2 years earlier, on May 27th, 2016, Ms. Heard had publicly accused Johnny Depp, her husband at the time, of domestic abuse. You will learn during the trial that Ms. Heard's actions were prompted by Mr. Depp's request for a divorce. he wanted out, which drove her to make up a story that was, at first, designed to keep him. And then, when he made it clear that finally, after all he had endured, he was done, was designed to recast herself as an abuse survivor, with Mr. Depp as the alleged abuser. The evidence will show that 6 days after Mr. Depp requested a divorce, and he did so politely, and 3 days after Ms. Heard's lawyer threatened Mr. Depp with claims of abuse if he did not agree to her financial demands, Ms. Heard arrived at the courthouse in Los Angeles, California, to file for a restraining order alleging abuse. Ms. Heard, the evidence will show that Ms. Heard showed up with a mark on her face that mysteriously appeared 6 days after she last saw Mr. Depp, and 6 days before she publicly filed a request for a domestic violence restraining order alleging abuse. No one, as I stated before, no one had ever, in 5 decades, no one had ever accused Johnny Depp of being abusive of any kind with a woman. He had been in other long-term relationships, as I said. He had 2 children. And no one had even suggested ever that he was capable of something like this. By choosing to lie about her husband for her own personal benefit, Amber Heard forever changed Mr. Depp's life and reputation. The evidence will show that the last time Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard saw each other before Ms. Heard showed up in court on May 27, 2016, was May 21st. And that's a very important date, and I will ask you please to remember that through the trial. Mr. Depp's mother, Betty Sue, passed away on May 20th after a long illness when Johnny and his sister Christi had been taking care of his mother for a very long period of time. And for reasons that Mr. Depp will personally explain to you throughout the course of this trial, he had resolved to divorce Ms. Heard. So on May 21st, Mr. Depp came by the apartment that he shared with Ms. Heard in the Eastern Columbia building, or the ECB, as some people refer to it, to tell her that, to pick up his things, and to say goodbye. There is no dispute that soon after Mr. Depp ended things with Ms. Heard and left the apartment on May 21st, he got on a plane to head out on a European tour, a music tour, for months with his band, the Hollywood Vampires. And Ms. Heard knew that he was going off on tour and out of state when she walked into court to get the restraining order, which she obtained ex parte. It's a Latin word, fancy word, but all it means is that Mr. Depp and his lawyer were not there and had no opportunity to be heard. That's what an ex parte order is. You will hear from the police officers who responded to a 911 call on May 21st after Mr. Depp left. The police officers will testify that they saw no injuries on Ms. Heard. Both police officers will testify that they saw no injuries on Ms. Heard. Nor did the police officers see any of the property damages that you will hear Ms. Heard claims existed in the apartments that evening. And you will hear from multiple witnesses, including Brandon Patterson, who is the manager of the Eastern Columbia building, where Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard lived together. You will hear Mr. Patterson say that he saw, and others will say as well, that they saw a surveillance video from the week of May 21st that showed Ms. Heard's sister, Whitney, throw a fake punch at Ms. Heard's face. Now, let's just stop there. This is a surveillance video you will hear about where the sister of the alleged victim threw a fake punch at her sister, which allegedly occurred, this incident, only a couple of days earlier. Ms. Heard acting out being punched, responding to the fake punch, and the two laughing about it. So you have the alleged victim and the sister laughing about a fake punch. And you will have to decide for yourself, or we ask that you please decide for yourself, would anyone ever joke about that if there had been actual abuse? Much less ask yourself, would a sister ever joke with an alleged victim about being punched by her husband? When Ms. Heard walked into court on May 27th and got her restraining order. Instead, as you can imagine, the media storm was instantaneous. You will hear about and see some of that media coverage, which published pictures of Ms. Heard walking into court and other pictures supposedly showing injuries supposedly caused by Mr. Depp, a man who had never been accused of abuse of a woman.
You will hear that Mr. Depp learned at a very young age how to coexist with an abusive woman. You will learn from Mr. Depp's sister, Christi, and from Mr. Depp that their mother, Betty Sue, lived in a constant state of anger that would boil over daily in vicious words and violence directed at her husband and their children. And you will hear how Mr. Depp, who had the personality of his father, coped with that abuse in the same way his father did. He just took it. The evidence will show that Mr. Depp learned that the best way to deal with violence was to leave, to get away from it. Give her time to cool down. But he never turned his back on his mother. Mr. Depp loved his mother, and he cared for her until the day she died. You're also going to hear evidence about Ms. Heard. You're going to learn that she's a profoundly troubled person who manipulates the people around her just like she manipulated Mr. Depp. Ms. Heard came to Los Angeles and sought a career in acting after Mr. Depp was well established as a movie star. Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard first met in 2009 on the set of the film The Rum Diaries. There was a significant age difference between them, and at first he avoided her advances, but she pursued him. She wooed him. The evidence will show that Ms. Heard went to great lengths to win him over by playing the doting girlfriend, and it worked. He fell head over heels in love with her. Those who watched this relationship develop saw red flags all over the place. You will hear from them in this trial. And over time, the real Ms. Heard began to emerge. She would berate him, scream at him. He would try to appease her, and sometimes, just sometimes, things would get better. But it would always happen again. The evidence will show that Mr. Depp started coping with Ms. Heard in the same way he did as a child. He would try to get away, avoid the conflict. But his trying to leave enraged Ms. Heard. She would resort to physical violence, throwing things at him, hitting him. She would tell him he was a coward. She would tell him he wasn't man enough because he wouldn't stay and fight with her. You will see that Ms. Heard equated anger and violence with passion. She would apologize with poetic excuses, as if the violence just proved how fierce and overwhelming her love for him was. And you're going to hear that when Ms. Heard got violent, Mr. Depp would just retreat, just as he did with his mother. He would try to leave, to get away from her. In her words, Ms. Heard's words, he would split Mr. Depp would often retreat into bathrooms, lock the doors, wait out Ms. Heard's aggression, but his leaving just provoked her more. You will hear from Mr. Depp's security people, like Sean Bett, about how they often had to remove Mr. Depp from scenes with Ms. Heard, screaming at him, chasing him, trying to keep him from leaving. You're going to hear evidence that when Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard traveled together, his team routinely had to book an extra room for him so that he had somewhere to go when Ms. Heard became enraged. You'll hear from other witnesses, including Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard's marriage counselor. Her name is Dr. Laurel Anderson, who perceived Ms. Heard as the aggressor in the relationship. Ms. Heard as the aggressor in the relationship, the one who would strike Mr. Depp to try to keep him from leaving. The only medical report of an injury during their relationship was a severe one, and it was sustained by Mr. Depp. After an argument shortly after their marriage, while the couple was in Australia, you will hear evidence that the people who cared about Mr. Depp were encouraging him to have a prenuptial agreement with Ms. Heard, but she rushed the wedding date, and he agreed to get married without one. After the wedding, again, people close to Mr. Depp encouraged him to consider a postnuptial agreement. When the topic came up, Ms. Heard became outraged, as she always did, at the suggestion that Mr. Depp might leave her. She berated him, and when he tried to leave, she became violent. She became so violent, in fact, she threw a vodka bottle at him that hit his hand and exploded. It severed the end of one of his fingers. You'll see pictures of Mr. Depp's severed finger and learn about his emergency medical treatment for that injury. And then you'll learn, and this is important, years later, after the false claims of abuse that caused Mr. Depp to file this very lawsuit, Ms. Heard came up with an elaborate story about what actually happened, according to her, in Australia. And what she said happened was that it was a 3-day hostage affair, an episode, where she was violently attacked and then sexually assaulted by Mr. Depp. You will see for yourself that the evidence does not support the story she told after she was sued. You will hear from Mr. Depp and other witnesses, including their marriage counselor, Dr. Laurel Anderson, that Ms. Heard would go to great lengths and even resort to physical violence to stop Mr. Depp from leaving her. But once Mr. Depp did leave, Ms. Heard tried to avoid public humiliation and present herself as a noble survivor and representative of the Me Too movement. You will hear evidence, including the testimony of Ms. Heard's former personal assistant, Kate James, that Ms. Heard is obsessed with her public image. It's her #1 priority. And you will see evidence that after she received a $7 million divorce settlement from Mr. Depp, Ms. Heard released a public statement claiming she wanted nothing from him and would donate the entire settlement to 2 charities: the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles in California and the American Civil Liberties Union, also known as the ACLU. But then she did not make the donations. Quite simply, Ms. Heard had publicly cast herself in the role of a domestic abuse survivor. There was no going back. When Mr. Depp finally stood up and fought for his good name in court by filing this lawsuit, Ms. Heard, because she couldn't back down, went all in. After this lawsuit was filed, and it's important, the timeline here, after this lawsuit was filed, Ms. Heard started making up more and more alleged incidents of abuse. And if you'll recall, ladies and gentlemen, The headline of the op-ed references sexual violence. But Ms. Heard had never made that accusation against Mr. Depp. It was never part of her allegations of abuse. So what changed? What changed between 2016 and 2018? We submit to you, and the evidence will show, when she realized the seriousness of what she had alleged, she panicked and she alleged sexual assault.